Welcome. This is, I think, our fourth panel now of Let's Talk Kingston. Third panel now. Feels like four. I don't know what's happening. And I think it's a really important discussion to be had. We have a lovely panel that Sinada is going to introduce shortly. Um, uh, I would like to take a moment. We had our last meeting and it had to do with our Indigenous community, speaking to the Indigenous community in Kingston. And we had a question about land acknowledgement, whether it was tokenistic, whether it wasn't. And I think in the end, we decided that, if you've had that conversation with members of the community and you understand what it is that you're saying, that it's appropriate to do so. And so I would like to acknowledge that, we are having this meeting in the territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe territories. And, we acknowledge that we are here on their land and that this meeting is taking place in that on that space. And that we wanted to just acknowledge that. And then we like to start off our meeting. And I'm going to throw it over to Sunita. And while she does the introductions, hopefully I could get onto my computer. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you,
actually,
Abba.
before I probably introduce Sunita, I feel like Sunita is a member of our family, so I forget to introduce her all the time. But to those who she may be new to, she's been very active member in the Kingston community for the past 23 years. She's going up for her chamber re-election. So if you happen to be on those boards or on a business, don't forget to go and vote for her. I think today is the last day. She was born in Kenya to parents of Indian origin, and she's lived over 4 continents by the age of 18. Her lived experience includes exposures to various cultures and backgrounds, and those things have continually influenced her views on equity, on inclusion, both in her personal and in her professional life. She's served the community Kingston, as I mentioned, in various capacities, one of them being a current board director for the Greater Kingston Chamber of Commerce, for which she's hoping to get back and be re-elected. She's been the past president of the India-Canada Association, past board director of the TET Center, and she has been working with Kingston Immigration Partners, who we have partnered to do this series along with funding from United Way. And so now I'll turn it over to you, Sunita.
Thank you, Abba. And I don't have Abba's introduction, but I think, again, we all know her. I'm going to just call her the Unstoppable. And I appreciate Abba as a community member taking so much time of her personal time to volunteer to make our community more inclusive. And it really is nice to have such a dedicated champion. So thank you, Abba. I really appreciate the support as well. All right. I have the pleasure of introducing all our panelists, and I'm going to start off with Meena Krishnamurthy, who's an assistant professor in the philosophy department at Queen's University. Meena is currently writing a book, The Emotions of Nonviolence, and a series of related papers on Martin Luther King Jr.'s political philosophy. So maybe we can all request a signed copy from Meena when it's ready. Another person that I have a lot of admiration for, and I also call her unstoppable, that is Judith Brown, a longtime Kingston resident. She's a retired teacher formally, but is still an active teacher. And I can say that because every interaction with Judith is a learning moment for me anyways. And she is currently a trustee with the Limestone District School Board. And last year, Judith received the Jim Bennett Award from Queen's University for her role in advancing ethnic and racial inclusion and for being a long-time champion for change in Kingston and at Queen's as well. So thank you for joining us, Judith. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Mona Rahman, who was born and raised in Kingston. And the little tidbit about Mona is that she was one of the last babies born at Hotel Dieu Hospital. Her parents of Bangladesh origin immigrated to Kingston, and she's a Queen's alumni. Mona holds a PhD in biochemistry. She's currently the coordinator of research activities and communications at the Office of the Vice Principal of Research. She's also the member of the University Community for Anti-Racism and Equity. Mona has been involved with the Islamic Society of Kingston throughout her life in various roles. Welcome, Mona. Sush James, again, someone that we work with a lot, a champion for diversity and inclusion. He is officially, his title is the Equity and Inclusion Consultant for the Limestone District School Board. And previous to that, he was a secondary teacher and a basketball coach, also an athletic director at Frontenac Secondary School over a span of 20 years. He's a graduate of Queen's University and a limestone product. These are Susha's words, a limestone product from Sydenham High School. Amongst us also today is Melanie Howard. She's Turtle Clan of Mixed. I'm going to attempt to say this right, Melanie, and please correct me if I don't have it right. Kenyaneka? No.
Kanyagahaga.
Kenyakahaka, thank you. And settler background from the Mohawk community of Kennesatake. She lived in Kingston since 2007 and is the mother of 2 daughters who have attended both the French and English public school boards. Melanie's been a member of the Limestone and Indigenous Advisory Council and of her local public school council for a number of years. Professionally, she is the director of Aboriginal Access to Engineering at Queen's University, where she leads programs in STEM educational outreach for the Indigenous and Black youth. She is the inaugural recipient of the Principal's Teaching Award for Indigenous Education in 2020. We have Sasan Mohammed, who is a first-generation Sudanese Canadian. She was born and raised in Kingston, Ontario. This year, she is a freshman at Queen's University in the Concurrent Education Program, where she hopes to get a degree in education, political studies, and history. She has been involved in anti-racism and organizing since the 10th grade. Wow, incredible. You started young. Alejandra Zamora Flores, who's again, a pleasure to call you a colleague and a fellow community member. She was born and raised in Mexico, moved to Kingston in 2016 due to family bonds and health complications. Moving to Kingston has been her biggest challenge. Overall, employment, housing, education, healthcare, and social connections weren't as smooth and accessible as she had imagined. Her kids have been in 3 different school boards in Kingston during the past 4 years, and she wants to share her personal experience with us today. Our sign interpreters, Sue Q. Lethbridge, who was born and raised in Etobicoke, Ontario, and is a graduate of Sheridan College's interpreter training program. She has traveled around the province providing interpreting service for 28 years and relocated to Kingston from Newmarket, Ontario. In 2018, Sue continues to interpret as well as provide administrative support to the Human Rights and Equity Office at Queen's University. We also have Anna Salgado, who is amongst us to support as a sign interpreter as well. And as we continue to attempt making our events more accessible to everyone. Last but not least, Yujir Ko is currently the project lead for the Service Delivery Improvement Project at Immigrant Services of Kingston area. She primarily works in promoting newcomer children's mental health and resilience through non-traditional therapeutic interventions, such as art and play-based therapy with refugee children. During her career in social services, she has worked with children and families who are racialized, new to Canada, and have experienced pre-migration, migration, and post-migration trauma. Again, an honor to call Yujir a colleague as well. Thank you all for being with us today. Over to you, Abba.
Hi, welcome everyone. I really want to just say how much we appreciate you being here today. I know that it also takes a lot of energy to be a part of these events and to speak to your story, and that I appreciate that you have accepted this invitation to be here and to share your stories and to listen and to hear and to come up with some suggestions perhaps so that we can then further not just these discussions but past that. I also want to kind of acknowledge that we did get several stories from several people who weren't comfortable being online and having their face, but want to get their sentiment of their story. And I think that resonated with me, that there were so many people who had stories and there were so many people who were afraid to share those stories because of whatever repercussions they think will still happen in present day Kingston. And so I think that's something to be said about where we are at, if it is that that's the environment that we're creating. And so hopefully we can kind of speak to that today too, and maybe also give some hope to those people as to resources and other avenues that things can be channeled through so that they feel a little bit more empowered and supported. I also would like to say that, while we will get chats and conversations going from people, we would also try to not specifically target any one school board or another and just express their general experience, because we don't want anyone to feel in a particular way. We're not here to kind of shame anybody, but just to have the general sense of the feeling and suggestions is that how we can progress. And yeah, so as we talk, feel free to go ahead and you can come in or raise your hand, or those who are there can ask questions to the chat and question and answer at any time, and we'll get to those. And I'd just like to start by asking everyone to take a few minutes to share your story. If you're not speaking, I'd ask if you can keep your mic on so we can keep kind of the background noise to a minimum. But maybe I'll just go around in the circle of my computer screen, and I'll start with you, Sush, because you're right to my right.
Okay, thank you, Abba. I appreciate the invitation and being here. And I won't spend a lot of time because I am here to listen and to learn as well and to do better. So a real quick thing: Sydenham High School and Queen's University product, and experience Kingston in a whole host of ways. And spent a lot of my time trying to assimilate into the culture here in all spaces, not just school, but everywhere. And just very recently with certain things that have happened in the world and certain things that conversations that I've had with families and students over the last couple of years, decided that, what, I have to kind of come back to this conversation after 20 years of pretending it didn't affect me that much, and coming to terms with the fact that it has impacted me a lot with my upbringing in Kingston, and trying to do better for the next generation. So here you go, and thanks for having me again, Abba.
Thank you. All right, Mona.
So yes, I was born and raised in Kingston as well. I'm probably older than Sush though. So I'm going to tell you that I don't have, I'm going to tell you about my own school experience, because that's what, and honestly, my school experience growing up in Kingston was actually quite supportive. And I think part of that has to do with the schools I went to and the community that was created for me. And the more I reflect upon this, and Mary McLeod, who is Sush's predecessor, she actually is the one that said this once. So I went to Centennial Public School, which was pretty diverse. And the reason being that it is right by Enclacken, where the international students are, the graduate students are. And I will tell you that my best friend in first grade was Chinese. My second grade was Japanese, and third grade was Indian. So we had that, and that was a whole time when multiculturalism was the big thing. And so we did have a diverse environment in the school. We had a great principal also that set the tone for that. Then I went to Calvin, and I will say that at Centennial, my sister and I and my adopted brother were probably the only Muslims there. Growing up in Kingston, I'm Bangladeshi. There were maybe 4 Bangladeshi families, 2 Hindu, 2 Muslim. My identity was, no, I'm not Pakistani. I picked up the language because they spoke it to me. So when we got to Calvin, and you have to understand that the Muslim population at that time was maybe 10 families, and I'm probably one of the last of that first generation of kids. So we went to Calvin, and that's when you had more Muslims there. And then most of us went to LCVI, which also in that same neighborhood is more diverse, with respect to culture, with respect to the socioeconomics. It's, you want a group, you'll find it somewhere in Calvin or at LC. The one thing though is that as being the younger of that first generation of kids, everybody kind of set the stage for us as we went. We sort of followed along with our big brothers and sisters, as I say. And the interesting thing is that at LCVI, and Judy probably remembers this, when I was in elementary school, about 100 Malaysian students came to Kingston to do grade 13 so that they could go to university. The majority of them went to LCVI. By the time I got to LCVI, there was already prayer room established. There was a familiarity. with respect to that. And so we had, you know, our little group of Muslims, but I found that it was very, there was a lot of discussion with our friends. You know, we had your Greek friends, your Arab friends, they would compete as to where feta cheese came from, things like that. But it was I found it was very supportive, it was very open. So I'd say like in elementary school, because of a grade 6 teacher, when I got to grade 6, she brought math books to me so I could go ahead in math. When I got to Calvin, same thing. At LCVI, there were teachers that would push you and support you for that. So it was a very, for me, it was a very supportive environment. And if you think about it, our parents were actually very involved in the community, specifically with the Board of Education. So they were part of the Multicultural Breakfast Forum, which Sush is supposed to bring back. And in elementary school, we had the Lord's Prayer, which I sat down in. By the time they got to high school, they had compiled, there's no more Lord's Prayer, they had compiled a book of sayings from all different faiths and non-faiths. When I was in high school, every day we would hear a different saying. And so Muslims would go on Friday. So there was a lot of sharing of traditions and of beliefs. And, you know, we had teachers that would encourage you to make presentations on your faith. So that was my environment. And I think, as Mary said, your parents created this environment for you, you know, choosing the schools you're going to go to, but also working with the boards and the schools. My parents were very involved with the schools. But I will say that my experience was very different from that of my brother, who is 17 years younger than I am and who grew up on the West End, because it was a different environment. Flash forward because I work with the youth as well. Sousen knows I used to be youth group advisor, but I go into high schools. And the post 9/11 is a very different time in terms of people's perspectives and things. But I think that, and just the internet in general. So I don't want to I could go on and on, but I will say that my experience has been positive in the school. And because of parent involvement, because of the principals of the schools that I went to LCVI when we weren't supposed to say anything. The principal who was there transformed the school, and he aimed to know every single student's name. And those are important.
So, and I'm going to flash forward to you. How was your experience? Did it parallel Mona's, or do you have something?
I don't think it paralleled Mona's very much. I went to school downtown. Some very interesting things. I was like right in between downtown and also the North End, so I could see two very different sides of Kingston. In general, I'd say that like my experience was good because I was able to, you know, like advocate for myself, communicate well. I was also a pretty good student. And when I compare my experiences to like, you know, students that were struggling, you could see how they were treated. I think like my experience was
on that a little bit.
Oh, so like, for example, I don't know, like I had some experiences during middle school where there was a teacher that wasn't too great at like interacting with students with like troubled pasts, and I suppose I can get into that like maybe later when we discuss like specific incidents. But like I think that my experience was both being seen as well as unseen. So for example, like in Kingston, whenever you talk about racism, my teachers are always like, oh, in Kingston? Like, you sure this happened in Kingston? And I'm like, yeah, I'm positive this happened in Kingston. I've been living here. I have my skin color. I'm pretty sure I can remember events that happened to me. So like that kind of like skepticism that I get when I talk about, you know, my experiences, and then on top of that, I'm pretty visibly religious, so like it's kind of like that hyper visibility that I tend to get just from wearing a scarf. And yeah, like that's my general experience.
Thank you, Susan. There was a lot of head shaking between Mina and Melanie, but I'm going to go to Mina first, and then we'll go to Melanie next.
Well, I was born in London, Ontario. I'm first generation of Indian origin. So my experience is probably different than many people just because it's a different city, and London had a probably bigger South Asian population than Kingston has had. But I mean, the idea of being visible and hyper visible is something that strikes me as, as kind of a known phenomenon. So I guess I've only lived in Kingston for just over a year, and my child is sort of in middle school. I guess, I don't know if you use those terms in Kingston, but I guess, yeah, in middle school. And I think my main experience, I mean, I don't have as much to offer as others. So in some ways, I'm really just here to listen and learn and think, has been like maybe just not knowing initially what the resources are. And in a town, at least visibly, that doesn't seem super diverse, you're wondering, like, how do you connect with other people of color, immigrants? And I think the main thing is not knowing what the resources are and exactly how to find them has been one thing that I've been thinking about. And obviously we're in this moment where we're talking about Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter, and we're seeing some of these movements take place here in Kingston. And the school board, from what I can tell, is trying to play catch up and is trying to start to have some discussions about race and ethnicity and diversity within the classroom. And not to say, I mean, again, it's very well intentioned, I think, but I think you have a lot of people who don't have a lot of background in race and ethnicity talking to our kids about race and racism and saying some things that sound strange. And again, we can maybe get into the details later when we get to the incidents. So on the one hand, I love hearing all the positive things that Mona's saying about her experience, and maybe I'm also appreciating some more critical things coming from Sasan. And I think I'm seeing both of those, like well intentions from people trying to step up to the plate and talk about important issues, but also lacking like the background knowledge and skill that are needed not only to give information about race and racism in Canada, but like how to navigate the conversations that the children themselves are having with each other. Because when my child comes home and tells me about some of the conversations that the children are having, they parallel some of the very worst discussions I've heard among adults around all lives matter, for example. And it takes a really skilled facilitator, I think, to navigate conversations like that. And this isn't a point of blame, but the point is we actually need experts to come and bring these conversations to our children so that they sort of take place in the right way and can navigate these conflicts and tensions. And again, even as adults, we're not always doing the best job. But so, I think I'm feeling this tension of like well-intentioned, but we need some work. And so I guess I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mina. Melanie.
All right, I was kind of jumping in and out while Mina was speaking. So if my internet connection or if I freeze, please somebody indicate that to me. So I am a mixed race, Mohawk and settler, and I am very white passing. I'm not speaking about my own experiences. I'm going to speak to my kids, and my kids are mixed race. My older daughter's father is Black. And then my younger daughter's father is from Guyana and immigrated to Canada, and he is of mixed Guyanese background. So she's pretty much everything under the sun, my second daughter. And I think, there's 10 years that separate them. And one is all the way through high school. She's now in university. The other is still in elementary school. Both children attended the French public board and also the English public board. And in reflecting on this particular topic, we've certainly had issues directly with some of the teaching staff in both systems. And I can't, so I can't say that my older daughter certainly did not have a very positive journey through the Kingston educational system. A lot of microaggressions, like almost constantly, I think, for my kids. And you know what, like we don't think about it. And it's almost, I was talking with my older daughter about this, and she was kind of saying like, I'd forgotten about all those, like, it happened all the time. I think I just thought of it as normal. And I said, for me, it's a contrast because my older daughter is visibly a lot darker than my younger daughter. And the commentary that she got constantly at school from other children, coming from their homes, I guess they're not discussing racism so much as just pointing out the differences constantly to my daughter, asking her what she is, wanting to touch her skin, wanting to touch her hair. And then when she answers the what she is question, getting questioned about that, saying, no, oh, come on, you're not really, especially on the Indigenous part. So getting that sort of, you know, you asked me what I am, I've just told you, and then turning around and saying, well, no, you're not really, is that was just a regular everyday interchange at school for my kid. My older one, my younger one has had that to a certain extent as well. Yeah, so and then I characterize sort of the interactions between, you know, the difference between the French board and the English board. The French board had a lot of very interesting racist behavior by the staff, based in ignorance, largely based in ignorance. So, I mean, you know, baseline, a few years ago, my younger child was at that school, and we went to the Halloween thing at school, and you had teachers dressed up as like Native Americans and geisha girls, and I was like, I can't even believe this is going on. This is like 2015 at this point. And then my conversations with those teachers who would find out, you know, my younger daughter actually, I would say, looks more visibly Indigenous. So questions about, oh, you know, you're Indigenous, very excited to find out about this. But then I got that same, but you're not really, of course, because I get that thrown at me quite a bit. But then a certain disappointment when I didn't live up to the expectation of Indigenous in their head. So no, I don't have a totem pole. I don't have a totem. That's not my culture. No teepees, like I don't, you know, we didn't have teepees here. When I was invited in to do a little cultural presentation in the classroom, like visible disappointment from the staff, because I didn't do the big tom-tom drum is what I was asked. And I just thought, okay, but I'm here to educate you that I'm Haudenosaunee. I'm going to get that I'm the people of this territory, and this is our culture. We have a small water drum. We do social songs, and I was invited here to teach you that. And then almost getting this disappointment from the staff of like, well, you weren't, like, that's not what we were going for, you know. So I get that whole. You know, teachers are being asked to teach Indigenous education now to everybody. And I hear Mina when she's cringing, like, I'm thinking to myself, like, I was asked to come in to help you with your Indigenous education. And then you're actually kind of saying, well, you're not what we wanted, right? And I was just like, you do understand there were like 600 different cultures across North America, right? We're not all the same. Yeah, so it's kind of a baseline ignorance that really sort of gets reflected in how they sort of reacted to me, and it made me worry about, like, how are they reacting to my child, and what are they expecting of my child? So anyway, I'm gonna stop it right there. I've got lots of stories, but that's our experience. We're a mixed race family, Indigenous and Black in Kingston, and it's not been super inclusive or understanding.
Thank you, Melanie. Alejandra?
Hi, Eva. Hi, everybody. Okay. My experience, I'm gonna start talking about my family experience. I was born and raised in Mexico, in a place where we've been fighting, or not fighting, we were being assimilating our Indigenous identity for over 500 years. In the last 40 years, my village lost their cultural heritage. My great-grandparents decided not to teach us the Indigenous language because it's a shameful language. And they decided to dress my parents and grandparents differently in a more modern way. So I'm already a person who has been struggled with cultural trauma for my whole life. My mom used to give me these beautiful braids, and at school they call me Indian. We use the same term, despective term over there. And I remember every time she used to do that, I just shake it out and I go with my straight hair, because I present myself as I white pass also in Mexico. So I try to forget all my indigenous culture. I married a Canadian man. We have 2 kids. We decide to move to Canada, and the challenge where my cultural heritage restart again. My struggles with adapting in Canada were high, mostly from my part as mother and as a woman. But I started noticing in the volunteer opportunities that I had in my kids' school that my peers were targeted with microaggressions at the same time as I was having them in the city bus, in the streets, and public services. I've been trying to understand what is this. 3 years ago, I went to a counselor, and I realized that it wasn't a theme of adapting, like something else was happening. And we were targeted as a biracial family. We couldn't adapt into this community easily. I shut down myself. I took some time to write a project in my family. Okay, this is me, Olive, trying to be Mexican, but also trying to adapt in this society. It's not working, but I'll try to do my best. So I started going to my kids' school one day, and I talked to my kids in Spanish, and the whole class just looked at him like, "What did your mom say? Tell us." And my son was so ashamed of our language. And I realized that, wow, it happened to me. It happened to me when I was a little girl, and my grandparents spoke their language, indigenous language. So I decided to start learning how Canada has been assimilating newcomers in their culture, and it has been an eye opener that microaggressions happen in daily basis everywhere, in every public place. And we, as family, we want to go through it, but we have to recognize that we need allies, and we need people from the community to understand that it's not easy being different here. And we can keep talking later.
Thank you. Judith.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Well, I myself, I have lived in Kingston, hard to believe, but it's been 50 years since I graduated from Queens in 1970. And during my time, I graduated from Queens, but I had already been teaching. So I got a job with the Limestone District School Board, which was called Frontenac at the time. And I have to say, my experience in teaching in the school was very positive. I had a great time. Naturally, there were incidents. And when those little incidents came up that I knew weren't appropriate, I addressed them. I would go to the principal and I would tell him, I think I need to speak at the next staff meeting. And I would. And, you know, the teachers were very receptive, but there were always one or two who felt, oh, she's paranoid. But, you know, in this struggle to get through, you have to be strong and just go for it, which is what I've done all my life. You know, I'm reminded of the words of John Lewis, that icon down in the States who passed away this past summer. And, you know, he said, these things that we have to do, they're not going to last for a week, for a month, or even a year. What we're doing takes a lifetime. And so I find us moving away at little things at a time. As I say, I've had fairly positive experiences. During my career, I also became a director in what was then called the Federation of Women Teachers of Ontario. And part of my job then, because that's when multiculturalism was being pushed in Canada. And Myrna, like your dad, I went to those breakfast forum meetings. And anyway, so I used to travel around Eastern Ontario because as a director, that was my region. And what I had to do at that time was help teachers tell them how important it was to get their classes looking more multicultural, and also talk to them about the language. For example, calling things, oh, that's a black mark against you. Well, how do I feel as a Black person? Because a black mark against you means something bad. And I had to encourage them with their language. For example, back in those days, the teachers would always they say, I want some flesh color paint. And the flesh color paint was the peachy color paint. And I'd say to them, that's not the color of my flesh. So I was involved in doing things like that, making people aware. But probably one of the missing factors was that you didn't see too many of the teachers who looked like me. And, which is what the kids, they are back then and even today. That's what is so needed. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. All right, guys, what a great round. I think what I'm hearing from the theme of this is that, we are saying that we appreciate that efforts are being made, whatever they may be, in whatever form they may be. But what we're finding is that, it's lacking the input from the people of whom it's affecting the most, and that education is a big deal. So that you can't just give a teacher a book and say, read this is how it's going to go. We have to really educate them as to instances and scenarios and how things should be approached based on the experience of those people who have been, affected by it. And so I'm going to use that to segue kind of into my next round of questions, which really has to do with, would you like to speak to a specific incident that may have happened to you or to your children, or that you oversaw as a parent? And how was it handled? And then the other flip side of that is, how would you have liked it to be handled? So that we could maybe start kind of dissecting some specifics as to things that we would have liked to happen versus what actually happened. So maybe we'll start with the incident that you'd like to speak about, how it was handled, and then the second part, how you wish it would have been handled. Yeah, who would like to go first instead of me going around? Okay, it's awesome. Your hand went up really quickly, so it's you.
Yeah, so I actually have a couple of incidents to speak about. So first of all, I went to a school, and there wasn't, I went to a school, and like the student body was kind of split in between like kids from the Heights and kids from downtown. And so you would notice in the performance of these students what was going on in their home lives. And at one point, like I noticed that like a lot of kids that needed IEPs, ADHD, dyslexia weren't really getting checked out for those sorts of things because, their parents were always working or they were poor. So like quite a few of those kids would go through the cracks. Another thing was that I had like an experience in middle school where my friend had told a teacher something in confidence, and basically she got outed, and like it had produced a very unsafe home environment for her, to the end like there was no involvement of it, and like it's been harmful till this day. I don't really want to go into specifics, but having knowledge about like where those boundaries are is really important, I think. And finally, when I was in middle school, I had this one teacher that would pretty much yell at this one girl every single day. People could hear it from other floors. And it was kind of traumatic because like she was setting an example for a lot of kids. This girl got bullied all the time, and I really wished that that could have been handled a little bit differently, because this girl had, she had like an IEP. She had like an individual education plan. On top of that, the teacher knew like why possibly like she wasn't doing things properly. And it didn't really constitute that screaming. And it got to the point where like other teachers would be asking this child whether or not she was okay. And it was kind of a little bit traumatic, I'd say, because like it was really concerning. Just because like you'd witness that and you'd think there's an adult in this room. You'd think that that adult was doing the right thing. And then on top of that, like kids would bully this kid being antagonized by the adult in the room. So that was very concerning. And then finally, like when I was in middle school, one of my friends got assaulted by students within our school board due to wearing a scarf. And there was follow-up with the Kingston City Police, however, with the Muslim student body and like Muslim students across town. But there wasn't follow-up with Muslim students within the school board regarding racism. And what that really tells me is that we weren't at that time really being seen by the school board. Like minorities, kids with learning disabilities, we were just kind of being overlooked, because like it needs to be from a bottom up. Like if you're a teacher and you're seeing these kids every single day, you should be able to know them. So I think that really that should be something that should be rectified.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And so coming back to how you would have wanted handled, I heard the one point in terms of like, maybe corresponding within the schools to the specific individuals and acknowledging that. And then I guess with respect to the teacher who was yelling, what would be how you would have liked it to be handled, or what you would have thought would have been a better manner in which to approach some of those things?
Honestly, I probably would have wanted to see some accountability, because frankly, like people could hear it from other floors. There were kids asking this girl on the playground whether or not she was okay, because they could hear the teacher yelling her butt off at her. It was very, very concerning that like, there wasn't anyone from in the school that wasn't telling her that, hey, that's not okay. Just from my perspective, just because like it was a really apparent thing. Like it,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was very concerning, actually.
Okay, Alejandra, why don't we go to you about something, because I know you said you went through several boards, so I think there may be lots of things to learn.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna talk about a little bit of my daughter's experience. We moved to Canada essentially because we need several specialists overseeing her health. And when she went to school, she started in junior kindergarten, and she couldn't speak. The teacher was concerned because she wasn't able to say anything, not even asking going to the washroom, nothing. And we started getting a little bit nervous. And we noticed, but that was during the school hours, but at home, she was like a flower, jumping around, speaking like crazy, calling my mom and telling her everything about the experience in the day, school day. And my husband and I were talking like the teacher is seeing one person and we're seeing another. What is happening? So the teacher was so concerned that they decided to refer her to a speech therapist, I think it's called. And that speech therapist was in Kingston, and we were living out of Kingston. So, and we decided to move to Kingston. She got into another school, in another school board, and we told the teacher about the health condition and the problems that we were having, and the speech didn't come out as easy as we wished, but she was relating with some classmates, one or two, and we were very actively involved in the school. I was volunteering, I think, 3 days per week, every morning. And I noticed that my daughter was interacting with kids, but she was under the radar of the school. And at that time, we got the speech therapy consultation. They did an assessment, and the doctor told us there's nothing wrong with your daughter. The problem is, well, the problem for the teachers is that she is bilingual. She is captain 2 languages at a time, and it takes time. It takes time to learn 2 languages at a time, and she will process. And when she feels ready, the language will come. Just keep encouraging, keep reading to her. We were doing that, and we, without that pressure or labeling like a speech impairment, we took it off and we say she's fine. We will do what we can. And we decided also to move her to another school board where we knew the kids were a little bit more inclusive, the environment was more inclusive. And after 1 week in that school, my daughter started singing in English, writing in English, and telling stories. And we talked to the teacher again, telling him the medical condition, and he said, "Your daughter is the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. She's amazing." And with that feedback, we at home, we realized that it wasn't a problem. It was just the way that she was being labeled, and it took a few months to realize that. And I also work with youth that go to ESL classes, and they have this feeling that they are not enough because their English is not enough. Like, why second language, English as second language speakers have to be labeled like less in the community, especially in the classroom. My son also had this. He's very serious, so he doesn't say anything if he doesn't need to. But I think part of the paradigm is that he doesn't feel safe speaking in his second language, and I don't know if somebody else feels related to this. I'll leave it there.
Sorry. Melanie or Mina, anyone wish to go next? Oh, Melanie, did you go?
Yeah. I can, there were sort of 2 incidences that stood out to me that I wanted to share. And they both happened in the senior years of my daughter's high school experience. And one of them kind of revolved around anti-Black racism, and the other one, anti-Indigenous racism. The school knew me well by then. And so there was an incident where one of her teachers was showing a video of sort of a mocking of Black culture, and it was really making her uncomfortable. He thought it was very funny. And she kind of spoke up and said, "No, like, this isn't funny. This is pretty racist, actually. Like, I don't appreciate you showing this." And he did it a couple more times. And then she mentioned it to me. So we had to, obviously I called the school. The way it was dealt with was and I had to smile when Judith, you said, oh, people would just say, oh, you're just being paranoid. That's exactly the way it got dealt with by the administration, was that she's too sensitive. And they actually said, well, we asked the other people of color in the class. And my daughter said, like, one girl's Arab and the other one's like half Asian. Like, what did they have to say about this being anti-Black? And that justified it for the school authorities, like the administration, to not take it any further, to not sort of censure the teacher. The teacher's like, oh, it was just a joke. And my daughter was saying back, listen, it's not funny, it's offensive. And that just sort of ended there. And it ended with my daughter dropping the class. It was a 12U class. She didn't need it for university admission, thankfully, but she's just like, I'm done. I'm not going to, I don't want to deal with that teacher anymore. And, you know, I kind of said, like, that's fine. I support you if you want to drop the class. I know you could do it. You were fine in the class. Later in the year, we had another incident of anti-Indigenous from, again, teacher. Both of them were white males. And again, my daughter spoke up and said, this is like what you've written here is like, just really, it's not funny. It's racist. Like, she's calling it what it is. She tried to negotiate it. And again, she came to me when it wasn't getting anywhere. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's not good. But given how the previous incident had gone, this time I actually went straight to the board. So I went to Sush's predecessor, Mary, and said, listen, my daughter's having these, like, this is the second issue this year. Can you give us a hand here? Because last time it just wasn't dealt with. So the EDI staff from the board got involved with that one and met with the teacher. I think there was more of a jump on, and like, again, this is my interpretation of it, but I'm the Indigenous parent. Like, they know I'm the Indigenous parent, and I'm saying that what this guy is saying is anti-Indigenous racism. You need to deal with this. It got dealt with. It got dealt with in a much more effective way than the anti-Black racism that we identified earlier. And I really wondered, like, as a parent, is it because I'm not Black and coming in there and calling you out on this, that you're not taking this seriously? It became that, you know, my 17-year-old daughter, she's just too sensitive about these things. And it really made me, you know, so we had a little chat about this over the weekend. I said, I'm going to share these two incidences, these two stories. Will be pretty vague about the context, but I just found it was an interesting contrast because of who I am as her parent. And when the parent was maybe able to be in her corner a little bit more than when, you know, it was outside my own personal experience of what she identified as being, again, anti-Black racism that just got swept under as she's just too sensitive and nobody else had a problem with it. And it's just, anyway, so yeah, so sometimes, and I suppose those other students probably felt really centered out as well, being like, what, you're gonna ask me to comment on this? Because I'm not white and I'm like the only other not white person in this class. So yeah, so obviously I think taking a student's concerns about like racist behavior by staff a little more seriously. A couple of years later, I heard from another Black parent about the same teacher, like same stuff was still going on. So sadly that didn't get rectified. In the anti-Indigenous case, I did feel that there was kind of a resolution there and it became understood. I don't think there was no apology or anything, but I think the teacher backed down once the EDI staff from the board got involved to say, whoa, no, you can't do things like that. This is why. You're really not creating an inclusive environment if you're saying things like this. So yeah, so those are just two contrasting experiences. And they happened in a year that my daughter was really trying to advocate for herself, you know, like as you get on in high school, I've been saying, Sausan, kind of like nodding. You're an older high school student. You don't want your parents coming in. You don't want your mother coming in to like talk to the principal about your teacher. But when you don't feel heard, that's a problem. So at the same time, that same year, I think there was a gathering that the board put together for students of color, which my daughter really, really appreciated being invited to, but it didn't really have that spillover, I guess, into her sort of everyday lived reality at the school when incidences would come up. So a little bit of a disconnect there. Like in one sphere, she felt that she really had a voice and she could really speak out and say what needed to change. But in her everyday, classroom, she had to drop a class because the teacher was just racist and rude, and she just didn't want to deal with it anymore. So.
Right. Thanks, Melanie. And, I'd add to that, someone had shared a similar story, but from the point of view of she is white, her husband is of Black descent, and she found it difficult speaking on behalf of her daughter, but she was the parent that advocated for her daughter. But I think she felt that when she went to the school board to say, these things are racist, this is what my daughter is saying, they didn't put much credence into it because they were like, you are a white mother, what do you know, essentially. And so I think just being mindful that regardless who you are and who your kids are, that the concerns are valid and that those concerns need to be accounted for and not be silos. So not an incident and it's done. How are you showing the students that you have done an action? How are you showing the staff that this is an example so that they don't do that, right? And so making sure that there's that continuity. So there was a gathering. How does the essence of that gathering permeate through all the levels of the school all the time, Mina, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, a lot of what Melanie's saying resonates with me, partly because I'm thinking about the burden that's placed on people from marginalized groups, not just mothers and parents, but also the children themselves. I think, again, we've only been here for a year, but I think my daughter, who's also white passing, but definitely identifies as someone who's biracial and sees herself as down for the cause, I think feels pressure to advocate in different ways. And so I think one thing we're seeing is that if we don't allow white parents to do some of that work, then all the work falls on, people from marginalized communities, and that's an unfair thing. But on the other hand, we want the voices of people who are marginalized to be heard. So it's like this careful balance of like trying to work that out, which I think is difficult. But I think it's something that, that we should all be talking about. In terms of incidents, a lot of the comments that have been raised are just making me think, again, we've only been here for just over a year. So it's not like we've had a lot, but we've had enough experiences, I think, already. So I think one thing is I think we often think of race, and because we use the word racialized in Canada, which I haven't come back from the US, I'm feeling a little iffy about. For white passing children, they're racialized as white by other people. They're perceived as being white, but even though they don't feel that way, right? And so I have definitely in Kingston had the experience. So my parents were visiting from London, Ontario. They're very Indian, and we went to pick Sage up at school, and the whole group of, we were all waving. The whole group of her friends looked at us like, who are these people? Who are they waving at? And once they realized we were waving at my daughter, they were like, oh, I actually saw the look, like the mouths drop and the eyes open, like, oh, that's your mom, like that's your family. Because, my child is very white looking. So I think one thing in Kingston, this idea of like interracial and like white passing, I feel like people don't really understand that these phenomenons really exist. And so I think to me, like, I feel like there should be some education around that. That seems like one thing. The other thing, I guess, as I had sort of mentioned earlier, and thinking again about what Melanie's saying about her daughters advocating for themselves, is that some of the hardest things I think to navigate around these issues are the conversations that children are having with each other. And so then, you know, kids from marginalized groups are often playing the role of advocates. So when one child is saying all lives matter, that they don't accept people from the LGBTQ group, and my child is saying that she disagrees with these views. In this case, the teacher interceded, but basically said to my daughter that she should allow room for disagreement. And even though he probably is on her side, we have to make space for disagreement. And I do hear, like, you know, I think a lot of us in Canada are looking at the polarization in the United States and saying, if only people could talk to each other across the board. So I felt like that sentiment is kind of what was being expressed by the teacher, but even it felt like he was shutting my daughter down and her voice down when she was trying to actually show respect for her peers, because there are people that identify, you know, her friends that identify with the LGBTQ community. She was trying to show respect for those people and to speak up for them, but then was effectively silenced and, you know, essentially was asked to give this person another chance to say their views again, which sounds insane to me. And the only reason I didn't say anything is because, as other people are saying, when you have a child that's like in 7th and 8th grade, they don't want you to like interfere on their behalf, especially being new to the community. You definitely don't want to be the new kid that's got the mom that's calling the teacher all the time about racism. You know, so I think, I guess I'm really just sort of saying that I relate with a lot of what people are saying, and I've only been here a year. So yeah. I guess that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nina. Mona, would you like to add anything? And not necessarily maybe yours, but also of your children's, how their experience is different from yours, and
Yeah, it's very different. So I'm going to give you one incident from the past, or 2 incidents from the past, and then from the future, or from the present. So after, so like I said, I had a good experience. But my sister actually did have a teacher that it ended up, didn't do well in a course. And upon talking to other people, the people realized that this particular teacher was seemed to be giving lower marks to South Asians. This teacher was also a person of color. And the way that it was handled is that my father, who is a very mellow man, but you don't want to get him mad, my father went straight to the teacher and said, this is not the mark that she gets, because this is not consistent with what she is like. And he dealt with that like one-to-one with the teacher. He probably talked with other people as well, but that was resolved in that way, going directly to the source and dealing with the problem in that way. One of the biggest incidents in Kingston was, around the world, was 9/11. And the way that I'm gonna read, I don't know how to lower my hand. What the Board of Education did, and actually what Queen's did as well, is immediately after 9/11, they issued a statement to all of the teachers and the administrators and it was very proactive with respect to watching, making sure that the Muslims in the school board were okay. Immediately after that, the board put a project together, and this is at the time of Mary McLeod. So she reached out to the Islamic Society of Kingston and worked with us to put together a resource manual about Islam and Muslims. And a copy of that was sent to every single school in the board. And it's probably still there somewhere. So that is how that was dealt with, more in a proactive way, but also in terms of educating the people that are in the schools from the source, right? So the information was from the Muslim community. So that was then. Obviously, there has been a spike in Islamophobic incidents across the board, across the country. It is a ridiculously high percentage increase within the last couple of years. And that, of course, is in part due to the emboldening of people due to, certain leaders that were elected at the time. And as I said, I try to keep in touch with the youth and in the high schools. And there was, you could hear complaints. Some students felt they were being not picked on, but, said, oh, what do you think of that? But like being pinpointed in terms of discussion. Some people are fine with that. Some people are not. And when we keep hearing things like that, what ended up happening is that Mary, sorry, Sush, it was before your time. So what they did is they organized a meeting. We organized a sort of a chat in person with our youth in Kingston, the Muslim youth in Kingston, where we had so the equity advisor from the board come, as well as the superintendent of safe schools, who was Krishna Burra at the time. And it was basically a way for them, a safe space that they could talk about what was happening in their schools, and that information was then brought back to the board so that they knew what was going on, because these are not things that you hear from your kids or whatever. They tell me, they might not tell their parents. So it was a way to sort of get a pulse of what was happening. And I really appreciated that because, you know, it's at least they're trying to see what is happening in the school so that they can deal with it. Now, as my, so that was like on a grand scale, on a general scale. With respect to specifics, so we have had incidents. My sons are also biracial. If you go back far enough, we've got lots of races in us. So their father is Black, and they're brown from us. So what we have been noticing is that you have the anti-Black microaggressions, but they're coming not from the white population, they're coming from the brown population. And one thing that he once said is that, I think they forget that I'm Black. And it's very frustrating when it's the same thing as like you appreciate my culture or whatever, but you don't appreciate me. I think I stole that from one of Southson's people.
It's from Sabrina.
It was from Sabrina, yes. And that is there, and it's not necessarily at school, but they're from peers. And it is something that people are not thinking about. I think it's coming out more in terms of that brown complicity to anti-Black racism. And the way that it was dealt with is that I'm kind of annoying. And I just call up Sush and say, just so you know, this is what's going on in the school, because my kid would kill me if I called a teacher or anything, because it was really, you can see how it was weighing on him in terms of my friends are saying this, I can't believe they're saying this. And it just turned out that, the school board had already started this this educational program for anti-Black racism and anti-indigeneity. And that particular piece with respect to brown complicity of anti-Black racism was already part of that. And given the fact that this had happened, he actually, they ended up, the principal, because they were having a PD day, they ended up asking him if he would share his story. Anonymously, of course. I don't know how anonymous it is now, but anonymously, as a way, as part of the program in terms of educating the teachers, so to see what was going on and getting the students' stories. And I think that was really, like I said, it's a way of getting the stories, figuring out what's going on in your school, so that then if you know what the problem is, then you can go and find a way to fix that. So those are the three. I have lots of stories, but they are not my own. And I can give you things in general, things that have worked and things that have not worked, but I'm finding that communication piece, when you have respect from the teachers and the administrators, and you feel comfortable going to them, that relationship has been a very positive thing for us.
Thank you, Sunita.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing. And I mean, I can add to that a little bit as well, because some of the feedback we did receive from, some of our youth that Immigrant Services connects with, and other people through emails and whatnot, like some, the identity piece. And if you took off your hijab, then you felt you were accepted, or you were now going to switch schools based on how you were discriminated. So some of these things obviously are ongoing, and also how one minority group deals with another minority group. So it's not always just coming from the dominant group. So I think I'm going to move over to, Judith and Sush, perhaps, and you jump in, like based on everything that you've heard from our parents and students, any comments you wish to share, and how we can, again, this is all about making things or improving things, right? So how can we influence some change?
Judith, you want me to go first, or do you want me to defer to you as like I usually do?
Judith, you're muted.
You're muted, Judith.
I think she said, Sush, go first. I read her list.
Okay.
That's right.
So a couple of things. One is that this is why I won't speak for Trustee Brown, but we did speak a little bit in terms of why we accepted this invitation, because this is the work. And these are all stories that are consistent across all 72 school boards across the province. This is, and it doesn't much matter how diverse or not diverse you are. This seems to be the stories coming out. And we're just ready to be part of the solution. I mean, at the end of the day, this is why we are here. I'm glad Melanie mentioned the student voice piece that her eldest was a part of, because I remember them fondly, and what they had to say. And at that time, I think it was their last year, but where we've come from, that was a very powerful piece for us, because we're now done trying to have people convince us that racism exists in our board. I won't speak to the other 3 boards that make up Kingston, but in terms of our board, that 2 years ago, Melanie, just so you know, it was a major driver of why we are now going to be collecting race-based data. It was the nail in the coffin for us, because those stories, and I don't know, Trustee Brown, if you're around the table, or you were around the table yet for those stories that were shared and what came out, but right after that is when we started to say, look, we don't need to re-traumatize families and kids and to put them on the stage just to convince us that racism exists in our board. We're ready to do it, and all of these stories is learning for us, and we're ready to move on it. So, I won't say much more to it than that, except to say that these types of incidents are, when I get involved, they're taken really seriously when I do get there, and it is important that for us, part of our plan is, and I heard this loud and clear too, is that we want students to be themselves when they come to our schools. That is such an important piece to us right now. That that was also another piece that came out from a couple years ago in that student voice exercise. That is something that is now a really important piece for us moving forward. So, and again, I'll defer over to Trustee Brown to just add to that.
No, thank you, Sush. No, I hear those stories indeed, and they are indeed disturbing. And as you said, they have a very traumatic effect on the students involved, and probably the parents. The parents feel what their children are going through. But I am here and proud to say that with Sush and the rest of the equity team in our school board, they have put out, I like the name of it, they have put out an equity action plan. And I tell you, as a trustee, as I listen to what's going on, our equity team is really in action. And I feel encouraged because I have seen some changes already. For example, just when we had the November 11th remembrance ceremony, I felt such a sense of pride, because when they put together that program, in it, they included Indigenous soldiers, Black soldiers. There was inclusion. And you have no idea how proud that made me feel. I thought, oh yes, Limestone is finally on the move. So these incidents are happening. I know more will happen, but actions being taken. And one of the big things, we had a motion passed at our last board meeting, that they will form a committee that includes Black and Indigenous, well, they already have an Indigenous committee. So now they will set up a Black committee, which will include voice of Black student, Black parents, and parents of Black children. So I feel very encouraged. Thank you.
So I have a question. I guess it was brought up before. I think there are a couple of things. One is just knowing where the resources are. So it's great to have an action plan, but how does that percolate down to the level of each person in that school, so that there's ownership of that plan and that everybody's consistent? Because on the other hand, I've heard from several teachers that they feel very awkward in teaching certain subjects and in dealing with circumstances because they really do not have, like, a PD day does not give you the toolkit that you really need to have, the tools to deal with that in your toolkit. You're asking them to fix a plug and giving them a screwdriver or something, you know what I mean? So I guess, what is it that, how do we permeate your action plan so that it gets down to a level so that every teacher intrinsically knows, here's a resource manual, or this is how I deal with this. And that it's not just like a spur of the moment, here's something because it's an impetus of the movement right now, but something that has longevity going forward for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can answer that better than I, Sush. But part of that action plan is very inclusive so that they get what must be done and get everyone within the system to understand what is needed to address these issues. No, we certainly have an action plan that will include everyone right across the border. Sush, what else could you add?
Yeah, sure. So countering anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism, but along with that, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism is on the rise, all of these things, right?
Yeah.
It's going to take a while to counteract those things, but what you have to do is do it at every single level. You have to do it. You have to think about your workforce. Like, how is our workforce still whatever percent white still, right? So we are talking about that plan. Our students have to see themselves in their role models, and that is a conversation that our new human resources superintendent is begun. We have to we have to build these conversations, and we're doing it a little differently than other boards. Like, we are in my research, I am finding that this one-off training, like the 2 hours of anti-bias training or 2 hours of quote unquote anti-racism training, it doesn't work. And so it's a part of the plan. You got to do those conversations. But what is more significant and how you can get to the classroom level or to the student level is integrating these conversations in the processes you already have. So we know we bring principals together every month, as an example. And part of our strategy, which is different than most boards, I will tell you, okay? And just because I'm not convinced the other approaches work. So we have committed to that learning with administrators every month. That if we're going to take anti-racism, anything anti-hate seriously, then we have to integrate it in the processes we already have, as opposed to, I think somebody used the word siloing off equity as some separate entity that is not actually part of what we're everyday. Equities are everyday. And integrating that into our everyday processes could be our school goals, our school improvement plan, could be our administration meetings, You know, it is all these things. Anytime we bring teachers together for math, even for bringing together a math team, integrating anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism in those conversations in really cool ways. And for us, it's going to be, you don't know this yet, but it's going to be through the data strand. And so we have to do this and make it part of who we are and our beings in our everyday, so that it does get reflected down to the decisions, the individual decisions that classroom teachers make. And that's going to take a little bit of time, but that is our strategy. And I'm happy to field any other questions. Trying to keep it brief a bit.
Yeah.
I say that the plan has been put on the website of Limestone. One which wishes to look through it.
I think Mina had a question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's helpful to learn some more of the details. I guess I'm wondering if you could tell us a little more about what it means to integrate it into the process and who is really involved, like, in doing that. Because again, to me, it's like looking so far, I mean, as Judith, I think, said, and others have said, like, the school board isn't that diverse. So where do you get the expertise? Are you bringing people from outside? Like, just reading like White Fragility isn't going to be enough. So what are we talking about? Because, like, I mean, I'm really invested in this question deeply as a scholar, but also just as like a parent. So I would love to hear more about what that bringing anti-racism into all these levels look like. Is it like reading groups? Is it conversation? Is it integrating conversations with parents and families? Is it working with scholars who are talking about race and diversity and how to bring it into curriculum? I mean, or is it all those things? Like, yeah, I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little more about the details.
It is all those things. And it is right now creating that infrastructure so that we can have these conversations. We are getting a very, and again, I don't know what the other three boards are like in this scenario, but certainly for our board, Mina, your feedback is very consistent with what we are getting in terms of what teachers want, in terms of being comfortable talking about race and racism. And how do you field the questions of, for example, all lives matter? Like that is a thing in Kingston, by the way. like everywhere in Kingston.
It is a thing. It is really a thing.
It's a thing. And so
it sure is.
The great part about what, where we are right now is that teachers are reaching out to us in larger numbers. I now have a new elementary school equity consultant, which has been great because the volume has increased, right? And so, but one of the first things, Mina, is that conversation of how do you have these conversations when you know that all lives matter is going to be coming up. Some student is bringing that from home or wherever they're bringing it from. And how are you going to center the one brown kid? How are you going to center the one Black student prior to getting into those conversations? So it is, and sometimes it involves, okay, we will navigate this with maybe bringing in some expertise in terms of helping me learn to address the scenario. But a lot of it is finding finding time to plan these lessons better than we have in the past. Like it is, our kids are, because of social media and so on, they are coming in with notions of anything about race, because President Trump has made this an open sort of, you can say whatever you want now, and you should be okay. And that is not an ideal scenario in our schools that have these conversations, right? Like we have to be able to be better at navigating how we talk about race and racism. And quite honestly, we are at the beginning of trying to figure out how to do that well in a predominantly white classroom with one brown student, 2 or 3 Black students, and that is a different beast than what the GTA deals with to a certain extent. And we are, for us, I know Trustee Brown, we are welcoming folks to be part of this conversation. We are going to be putting together some different groups including racialized teachers, just ourselves. There's not a lot of us, you know, like we are going to be bringing ourselves together to have, like, how do we do this to protect our students? Some parent groups, and also some student advisory groups on, you know what, how do we have these conversations? And we're just really at the beginning of that, Mina, but I'd love to have a chat with you about your thoughts, because I think, you know, you're thinking about where we want to go, and our brains are there.
Thank you, Sush. Just wondering, are you able to provide us with these resources that perhaps parents and students can access? Like, is there something that is, I know you mentioned that there's some, the action plan is up on the website. I believe Judith mentioned that, but how can parents and students access these resources?
Well, the resources for us, when we put together resources, this is for our, like, we do professional learning with our teachers so that they reach their students, right? Like, that is what we don't, our audience is not the parent per se. Our audience is, we serve our students and through our teachers. And so, but having said that, you know, we're quite happy to share some of the things that we have initially put out in terms of, you know, these are the types of things that you anticipate in a conversation when you're talking about Black Lives Matter. And here are the things that you can kind of counteract the questions you get about All Lives Matter. You know, these are the types of things that you can go to as communication pieces to those kids about, no, it's not about Black supremacy. This is about everybody being treated equally, you know, and there's there's that educating part. And so, and a lot of it is just troubleshooting that conversation with teachers in different scenarios, a rural scenario, an urban scenario, and so on. But we do have, as a beginning, we do have like a 1-page thing that Ray, who's my counterpart in elementary school, put together to help with specifically the All Lives Matter conversation about race, because we have a lot more teachers wanting to go into it, but we want them to go into it doing it properly, like Mina said, right? And that's as far as we got so far. This is really, really new for us. But again, we can share that out, but it is really meant for a teacher audience, right? But we're happy to give it to folks. And you know,
I know that, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I know Sawson has a question, but I guess I'm not quite sure that quite answered the question in terms of, you know, as a parent, you know, I get that you're trying to educate a teacher, but if something happens to me or my kid, what are the resources so that we are aware of it? Because I think there's a very big disconnect between what teachers are learning and doing, and then translating into, I as a parent have a kid, who do I go to? Or I'm a kid in a school, who are the people that I go to and I can trust? And how does that get established throughout the year? And how can you refer to that when you're looking for it?
Thank you, Abba.
So are you talking about like resources or when an incident happens?
Well, both. I think like if I have a kid and something happens, how do I know what the process is and how to go about doing it? How do I
got you.
you? How do I know, or is there rules of engagement? If this happens, I know that a teacher should respond this way. And if they don't respond this way, what is it that I do?
Yes, okay, thank you. So the response about those types of let's call them incidents. So the process of how that looks is pretty standard across 72 boards. Like it's about the same. And so there's something that happens within the classroom. There's a teacher contact, and you try to get a resolution there. If that doesn't happen, it goes to the principal, and we get that part involved. And if that doesn't resolve things, or we're not happy with the short-term and long-term plan, that's kind of how I look at things. There's a superintendent, and then that becomes part of the conversation. And at any point in that journey, then people can connect with me. Now, what's not formally written in there is that they have to connect with me. This is a you know, the parent may reach out to me, like, you know, Mona has mentioned, or Melanie has talked about. Sometimes it's the principal or the classroom teacher directly that'll reach out to get involved and talk about, okay, what's going on here? How can we make this better? The one thing I will say to you is that when I do get involved with things, we never look at a single incident as just a one-off anymore. It used to be that way, that, oh, you know, it's just one incident, and, you know, it'll pass, and we'll try to get through this and it'll be okay again. We actually now talk about it in terms of, okay, resolving it in the short term, but understanding that that is actually a manifestation of a bigger problem, of a bigger conversation. So, but that's the general process that happens across boards, teacher to principal to superintendent, and then, you know, they bring me in if they at whatever level they want me to be part of the conversation. And that's typically how I approach it. You know, they say the days of one-offs are gone for our board, anyways. I don't know if that answered your question. But.
Thank you, Sush. Yes, yeah, we were looking for that line of action as a parent.
Right.
Sausan.
Yeah. So I have a question regarding what you're going to choose to frame these conversations around, because within the classroom. Because yes, we can talk about George Floyd. Yes, we can talk about police brutality within the US. Yes, we can all read To Kill a Mockingbird. But the problem is that we are not focusing on, and there seems to be a lack of knowledge surrounding anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism in Canada within the popular discourse. So when a student is trying to tell their peers, hey, Indigenous people are like less than 5% of the population, but a third of the prison population. Or, you know, like no one talks about Abdurrahman Abdi, who was a Black man that was killed by police. No one talks about Regis Korchinski-Packett. No one talks about Aisha Hudson. No one talks about the high-profile police murders within Canada. So I feel as though there seems to be a lack of information surrounding anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism that is accessible within our schools. So how do you rectify that? Just because, like, I'm a little bit concerned because, you know, all of a sudden we're going to talk about the American police force, but we're not going to talk about the Canadian police force. We're not going to talk about how that works, because these are very different systems. You need to understand that, like, the Canadian law enforcement system is very, very different from the US. Maybe they rhyme, but they're not the same. Yeah, that's something that I'm a little bit concerned about.
Yeah, I'm concerned too. This understanding current events is becoming and sort of understand that the geopolitical world that we live in is quickly becoming, Sausan, you said it well, an important teacher competency. You know, we have to understand our world around us and bring it into the classroom, and understand that this is not an American problem. Bringing in the Canadian context of everything, and that's going to take professional learning. The other piece that I'll say to you too is that we need to hire people like you, quite frankly. You know, not just in terms of your identity, but in terms of the anti-racism, anti-oppression lens, and actually getting a better picture in how we hire folks and understand it, whether they'd have that lens or not. Because we do need to start to build our staff with that understanding. So some of it will be professional learning, always talking about the Canadian context. Like, we can read American books, but understand how it connects to the Canadian context of racism. You know, and understanding our true Black history, as Judith will talk to you about. You know, Black history wasn't simply 30 years of the Underground Railroad and we saved everything. You know, there was a history of 200 years of of slavery in this country. You know, it is all those things. So I was and as I say, including starting to hire people that have a better understanding of this moving forward. So there is a long-term play here a bit, So it's going to take a little bit of time, but we can certainly, in every connection that we have with a group of teachers. You talked about the 5% Indigenous population, right? But make 1/3 of the prison population. That is a data piece that we can embed in math curriculum and have conversations around that. That is the movement that we want to do, and we have to teach our teachers. How do you navigate? You're doing math, right? But this is the piece of data that you're doing your math around. Well, now we have to get better at having that conversation around that piece, even though you're doing math. So you're building in anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism in all of our curriculum pieces to the best of our ability.
Okay, so something that I'm also concerned about is just media literacy, because currently in our climate, there's been some discomfort surrounding talking about these ideas and looking for factual resources. So what happens? A lot of students turn to online, and they may not or may not get peer-reviewed evidence. They may not get actual resources that actually talk about these things in a nuanced way, talk about the conservative lens in a nuanced way or the liberal lens. And that's really problematic because it's building a chasm between our students. So do you have any plans of including media literacy earlier on and making sure that kids are having safely going onto the internet? Because social media, with the rising rates of suicide in teenage girls, can be a dangerous place.
Yeah, no, that critical lens on and understanding how to navigate social media at a much younger age and building that in is going to be part of the conversation for sure. It has to be. That's the reality of our kids' lives now, right? That if we don't talk about it, they're going to come with certain beliefs in grade 9 or whenever, and it's very hard to counteract at this point. So you have to build that media literacy very early. We haven't wrapped our brain around how that's going to look yet, that specifically, but it is certainly a concern, and it's something that we need to build. We're going to have to probably have students help us build that too, actually, to be honest, our student advisory groups, because that's who's they're the best, very well-versed folks in this. So it is on our radar as well. Yeah, they're good points, really great points.
Thank you, Saucon. That was awesome. And I can see why Sush is saying that, yes, Limestone or other boards just need more youth leaders like yourself. Another thing that was brought to my attention, again, perhaps because of the population we work with, oftentimes students belonging, either newcomers or even refugees, when they're here, they hear, and again, perhaps from teachers or even their peers, fellow students, that they need to show more gratitude now that they're here in Canada. They should be more accepting of the fact and grateful. And yes, that's one side of the coin, but the other side of the coin is that they did not choose to come here. Their sentiment is that the circumstances where we in our country of origin, and they were so terrible that we had to leave, so it wasn't a choice. And again, I feel like it's not it's a comment more that how do we incorporate this in conversation and that education, raising awareness piece, with the teachers, with the staff, with the students.
So, Juice, you want to go? I've talked a lot, but I do have an answer a little bit, but. Good. Okay. There's a couple of things about this. One is that, Trustee Brown and I are here with the Limestone Board, and we're gonna do our best to address our sphere of influence. But when you're talking about refugees and newcomers and so on, we are in this together. We are not going to be able to create that true sense of belonging in this city, Limestone District School Board alone. That is not how this works. Kingston needs to do this with us. you know, and we are talking about, you know, the other 3 boards that aren't here, in terms of working together with them. We are happy to do that. We are happy to work with folks. You know, we're making some inroads with, you know, Jane Philpott and Selena Caesar Chavon is down at the Faculty of Medicine. We've started this Kazera Pocket that's taking this seriously, and we're having a conversation about how we can do better for Black and Indigenous students as a Kingston community. Ekta Singh is over at St. Lawrence College. We're having these individual conversations, but the reality is that we need to do this together. We need Mark Gerritsen at the table. We need Mayor Patterson at the table. We need Ian Arthur at the table, using their influence to advance and to act together. The police, we need folks to do this together, because we will not be able to create that sense of belonging and avoid this fixation on assimilating into the culture of Kingston or of whiteness without each other, you know. And
it's like it's said, it takes a village.
It takes a village, and we're just waiting for those folks to reach out to us and work with them, because we're going to try and do our part, but we serve Black, Indigenous, racialized students and families in our board. That is as far as our influence is, you know, but we want to impact all of Kingston. That is how we are wired. And so we are looking forward to that next step when the city of Kingston is ready to have that conversation.
So you're saying the next Let's Talk should be with those people and you. Got it. Done. Okay, so I want to kind of bring it back because I'm mindful of time and I want to be cognizant of everyone's time, but to talk about some of the alternative and kind of positive spaces that are being created in Kingston, not necessarily school board, but outside of the school board. And so I would like to ask Melanie to speak, if you wouldn't mind, to kind of the initiatives that engineering is doing with young people in the community and how they can kind of, you know that it's there so they can access it in the future.
Thank you for that. So in my position at Queen's, Aboriginal Access to Engineering, the stated goal is to increase the number of Indigenous engineers in Canada. So we've worked diligently at that for the past 8 years with quite a bit of success. The numbers of Indigenous engineering students at Queen's have increased like by 1,000 times. So when I started my job, there were 3, and there are over 53 on campus this year, including graduate students. We did this through building a community and extensive outreach programming for Indigenous youth to be able to see themselves in a profession where they're not typically represented. So, you know, the studies on engineering show that most people hear about engineering through someone who they know is an engineer, but if there are very, very few Indigenous engineers, where are kids going to hear about that? So our mission was to go out and create that space for kids, Indigenous youth. So we don't do a lot of work in Kingston on that. We do in the summers, but during the year we're in First Nation schools, which are not in Kingston. But we used our experience looking at the context of Black Lives Matter this past summer and really taking a step back as a team, asking ourselves, how can we contribute to somehow uplifting the Black voice and Black participation in what we do, which is you know, inclusion in the engineering profession, but also our particular area of expertise is outreach and STEM education out of school. So we decided to support a program to empower Black youth in STEM, and it's called Black Youth in STEM, allied with Aboriginal Access to Engineering. And it was quite interesting when I floated the idea. I consulted some Black colleagues on campus. Of course, it's very important, I think, for community voice to come into that. And these are colleagues that I've spoken with for years who have seen the work that we've done with the Indigenous community. And I know the sentiment was, it would be great if we could do this for Black kids too. So we sort of launched that program, and we're drawing on our experience. And the idea is to create I won't say a safe space, but just a space where Black youth are seeing themselves in the profession. So we're hiring students, Black identifying students, to run the programming. We're bringing in Black engineers and Black engineering students, so that they can see this as a viable pathway for themselves, and not be the only one, because that's kind of a situation our kids find ourselves in Kingston quite often. You'll look around the room and, oh, I'm the only one. So it's creating a space where they're not the only one, and actually Blackness is celebrated in achievement in science and engineering, and we just have fun with it. So that's some of the initiatives that we have going on. So the Indigenous community, we will often have for here in Kingston during the summer. All of our programming is online right now, of course, because of the situation we find ourselves in, but hopefully we'll be able to get together. But it's been really nice delivering packages out to families and getting to know them at from from the driveway as we get the materials out each week and meet each other on Zoom. So that program started running just this past month, and we'll continue running throughout the winter semester as well. So Black identified youth can look to sign up for that program if that interests them.
Thanks, Melanie. I'm slightly biased. I'm just going to put it out there. I am an engineer. So, obviously I'm like, this is amazing. And so take that with a grain of salt. They can't sign up for this particular session. I believe it's done, but I believe there'll be more coming, Melanie, right? Yeah. And we will share that on the Let's Talk page, the board resources, so that people can keep abreast of it. And perhaps what we can make a note to do is before signing up, or when there's a sign up, we can alert people so that they know. Also, I'm not sure if Yasmin is there. Maybe if you are, can you just send a message in the chat? And while we're waiting on Yasmin, there was a question, if there's a forum for kids to express their experiences with a view to bring some more resolve to concerns.
I actually have something for that.
Yeah.
So it is outside of the school board. But basically, I'm currently working with the Students' Commission of Canada as a volunteer, and this youth program called Youth to Kingston Front Athletics in Addington, to create a new youth strategy. So I have the email of the project lead for that in the chat. Her name is Amber, and it's amber@studentscommission.ca. And also I'm hoping I had previously had a racialized youth group that I had personally ran during the 10th and 11th grade. And I'm hoping to start that back up for Kingston racialized youth. So if anyone's interested in supporting me with doing that, that would be great. But it is in the works. It is in the works.
Awesome, thank you. I'm not sure if Yasmin is there or not, but there's also a program, Youths and Wings. Can I share my screen? Yeah, I'll share my screen. Host disabled. No. I'll wait for the thumbs up from you. You dear. So there's
so that would be Sunita who needs to make that change. Also, Ali has her hand up.
Okay, so while Sunita makes that change, Ali, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question for the school board. How far do you see the integration of intercultural learning in the curriculum? Going from Eurocentric to multicultural or intercultural? How far it is in Kingston?
Very far. We do presently again, and just school boards across the province, we have a very Eurocentric curriculum, and decentering that and celebrating Black authors, celebrating Indigenous authors, and not say Indigenous in a lot of different ways. Doesn't that, our, Indigenous on these lands, but also, you have quite the history of Indigenous experience, and those stories are important too. But diversifying the books, the stories, and along with the role models and the teachers is something that we want to do to the nth degree. It's going to take a while, but that decentering of the Eurocentric perspective in all of our spaces is something that is really, really high on our priority list in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different subject areas. Now, it's a great question. It is certainly the direction that we need to move into. Yeah.
Sunita, can I share my screen now? Trying, okay. Okay, so I'll speak to the Roots and Wings. It's a program, and it's a free program for Black, Indigenous, girls, trans, Two-Spirit, gender non-conforming, youth of color between ages of 8 to 14 years. And they are allowed to participate in structured programming that aims to educate, empower, and engage in social justice topics. They create space to allow the kids to explore their own identities, to teach and share skills, and to engage with their communities. They usually have sessions on Saturdays from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Oh, here it is. And we'll put a link for Roots and Wings in the Let's Talk Kingston so that people could also access that if they're interested in that program. So with that, I think that it's really encouraging to hear that, at least in the Limestone, because that's all we can really speak to here today, that, there are actions to try to really meaningfully make changes to support and to kind of acknowledge racism that is happening. And that's a good thing to hear. I think obviously we know that the journey is one that may be long, but there seems to be a lot of people like Sush and Judith and others and all of us here and others at the table who are constantly pushing to change that narrative a bit. And for that, we're thankful. And I think the main things we got from this is that we really just need a lot more communication from the top down level between all segments. Communication and education, providing people with the right tools for the job that they need to do, and supporting people so that they do not also have to bear the burden of then fixing the problem that is being done to them as well. And so, Mona, you have your hand up. Go ahead, and then I was going to say thanks, but you go in first.
It's just something that I have been hearing throughout all of the stories. And it's just, it's something that I think I've been focusing on lately, because the way I find that it's very different than the way that our parents raised us compared to how people are, it shouldn't be, but like when we were growing up, our parents, and I don't just mean my parents, I mean that generation of the parents of the people that helped raise me, that village, they raised us to be Canadians that are of whatever heritage, Bangladeshi heritage on my part, with a faith of Islam. So, the reason I say that is that I've heard this from time to time, and that whole multifaceted identity is something that we need to promote within our children. So that, my identity, and I had an analogy when I was talking to some kids in terms of, the ingredients of a pancake. And if you look at the ingredients of chocolate cake, a lot of things are in common. They taste different, they look different, but they have the same ingredients. Some things are different, some things are the same. And that whole thing about how we all have multifaceted identities. The reason I say this is I notice a lot of the kids that I used to teach would refer to their friends of the dominant culture as being my Canadian friends. And I would look at them and I said, you know, I was born here, you were born here, you're Canadian too. But that whole sense of identity that I am Canadian too is something that is part of their identity. And it's something that needs to be acknowledged, but also that we have all these other things. Like I always say, you know, I'm Canadian, I live here, I am Muslim by my faith, and I have Bangladeshi heritage or by memory. And then, you know, I'm a scientist. That's also a part of my identity. And you should celebrate all of that. I mean, I think I was also raised with the fact that, you know, we are told that, you know, Islam is strange and it will end up strange. It's okay to be strange. I tell my kids it's okay to be the weirdo. It's okay to be unique. And I think we need to, that's something I think we need to instill in our kids, that you don't have to be the same as everybody else. You have your unique characteristics that make you special. And if we keep, you know, I know it's easier said than done, but it's something that we need to instill in our kids, and that, you know, we're all different, and you look for the commonalities within people, but they don't have to be appearance. They can be other things. And that's how you build the bridges. I mean, I always say that I can start a conversation in this many languages because I learned how to say how are you from my friends, and it's a great way to break the ice and form a connection, and then you find out what else you have in common. But I'm going to stop talking now.
That was a great end. We do have a lot more in common that we have apart, and I think teaching that there's something to be said about that. Thank you everyone for your time. I think it was a fruitful discussion. We will be posting it because there are many people who asked to see it after the fact, so it will be there up on the site that we will be referring people to, and we will put up the resources that came from this meeting as well on it. We appreciate the conversation and your time here today, and thank you from myself, and I know Sunita will maybe want to say a little thanks, but thanks for coming up, showing up, and speaking up. It was very much appreciated.
Thank you, Abba. Echo your sentiment. Really appreciate everyone's presence here. And this is just the beginning. This is not all encompassing. And I think it's nice that we have these connections and we can continue these conversations. And like Abba said, yes, I think we have our marching orders for our next panel, Sush. Thank you.
So I guess I'll be calling you Sush because I'll be like, you set it up. So here it is.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Night, everyone. Bye.